Throughout my life, video games have been my primary hobby and source of entertainment. Several titles have resonated with me in one way or another, resulting in dozens, hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of hours of playtime. These games have impacted nearly every corner of my life, giving me unique experiences that have stuck with me for years to come. It takes a team of talented individuals that truly believe in their game to create this kind of experience, and this is the story of a game that delivered that experience to me. An inspiring, distinct, and genuinely fun game, all for the cost of nothing. So sit back, relax, and join me for a deep dive into Motiga's Gigantic. In the late summer of 2010, Chris Chung and Rick Lambright founded the independent game studio Motiga. Based out of Bellevue, Washington, the company was estimated to have 60 to 100 employees over its total lifespan. Motiga was an energetic and ambitious studio, with their goal to create a competitive multiplayer game that would bring a fresh look to the shooter genre. That game was Gigantic. Motiga announced Gigantic with a trailer uploaded to YouTube on July 15, 2014. This trailer showed off many of the early heroes in Gigantic's lineup, and the two main guardians that players would ally with. The initial draw for most were the unique hero designs, flashy art style, and animation quality. Development for Gigantic began anywhere from late 2012 to 2013, with its beta becoming playable in August of 2015. The game had promise. It was gathering a small fan base, and people were excited to get their hands on it. But then Motiga made a decision that would ultimately lead to many of the game's core issues. In March of 2014, Motiga announced that Gigantic would be coming exclusively to the Xbox One and Windows 10 store. This decision was met with almost immediate backlash from the newborn community, as it not only limited the game's availability, but did so on platforms that had several ease of access issues. It is believed that this partnership was made due to these platforms not having any games like Gigantic at the time, and the ability to cross-play between PC and console was an essential step for player growth. It was also rumored that Motiga had run out of funding and needed additional financial support from an outside source. With the release of the Xbox One a year prior, Motiga probably figured they would not only release Gigantic on a new console, but capitalize on the recently upgraded Windows 10 store. Unfortunately, everything that could have gone wrong did. In a PC Gamer interview, Chris Chung shared the struggles of the company, saying, quote, "We really underestimated the effort required to make games work on a totally new platform. We had to scrap the whole thing and rebuild everything in-game. We had months and months of development work that we had to do, essentially start over with. It was a very big challenge for us." Not only was Motiga catapulted into crunch time due to the platform change, but the ease of access issues of the Xbox One and Windows 10 store rang true. The Xbox app was a convoluted mess. The game was missing basic chat functionality, and there were many issues when connecting to matches. Delays and concerns of funds continued throughout 2015, when Motiga was forced to have its first round of layoffs. Around February of 2016, Motiga was still playing catch-up, and the studio had run dry on funds yet again. With a heavy heart, Chris Chung told his 75 employees that the journey was over, and laid off the entire remaining Motiga staff. This, however, is not quite the end of the story. In a PC Gamer interview, lead game designer Carter McBee stated, quote, "Even though we were all laid off and we were out of money, no one was willing to accept that this would be the fate of the game. We all believed so much in the game, we just thought, there's no way it's going to end like this. That's what drove us to come back, because we believed we'd been working on something special." End quote. The day after Chris Chung had laid off the entirety of Motiga, he came into the office to find every employee exactly where they were the day prior. Regardless of their employment status, the staff of Motiga continued to work on Gigantic without pay. It's estimated that around 90% of the previous staff stuck around, trusting that somehow, some way, they would pull through. Motiga continued to work on Gigantic for about 3.5 weeks before they were approached by publisher Perfect World Entertainment. In a miracle scenario, Perfect World not only partnered with Motiga to launch Gigantic through Steam and the Arc client, but they fulfilled Motiga's payroll obligation for the previous weeks that the staff had worked. Gigantic was saved again, fully launching on Steam July 19, 2017. Sadly, this launch would be met with an avalanche of unfortunate events. Regardless of Perfect World stepping in, Gigantic continued to have numerous problems. Players were still frequently met with several bugs, game crashes, and matchmaking issues. These issues, paired with snail-paced bug fixes and content updates, made Gigantic unappealing to a wide audience, and its already small fanbase was slowly dwindling. Not to mention the ease of access issues were still present. Gigantic was on Steam, but players were forced to navigate through the Arc launcher, creating another extra step just for players to reach the main menu and invite their friends. This also meant that the Xbox One and Windows Store versions of the game would not be compatible with Arc, splitting the already small player base in half. Now, if you didn't think it could get much worse, strap yourself in. Keep in mind that we're a part of the gaming community, a group that in one breath begs for unique and interesting games, and in the next review bombs one relentlessly because their computer isn't powerful enough to run it. Gigantic's Steam page was overrun with negative reviews due to the 6 GB of RAM required to run the game. Gigantic would inform you if your system didn't meet the requirements and wouldn't let you purchase in-game content, but people still felt the obligation to leave a negative review on something they hadn't even played. The game literally begged you to give it a chance, and if you couldn't, nothing but time downloading the game was lost. This, mixed with a mob of Blizzard and Hi-Rez fans, made sure the game was never given a fair chance to begin with. To this day, I am still baffled at how ignorant people were when comparing a game like Gigantic to Overwatch or Paladins. A game that was fundamentally different in almost every aspect and was announced first was labeled as nothing more than a clone riding off the success of others. And that is precisely the most frustrating part. Almost across the board, Overwatch and Paladins were inspired by or directly took ideas from other games. There's a whole spreadsheet dedicated to these concepts. If you're interested, it'll be in the description. The point is not that Overwatch and Paladins are clones as a result of the ideas they share, but that they took those ideas and created a new identity with them. The argument that Gigantic was a clone because it was a 5v5 hero shooter with abilities and a cartoony art style is laughable to me. If half of the people who claimed this actually gave Gigantic the time of day, they would have realized the fault in their logic. Unfortunately, due to all of these factors, Gigantic continued to decline, and its last update was released January 20th, 2018. The game's servers continued to stay open through July 31st until they were shut down for good. So why was Gigantic so special and ahead of its time? In order to really show Gigantic's depth, I'll be comparing it to games that were in similar genres at the time of its release. Yes, those two games are Overwatch and Paladins. The difference is this, however. I actually enjoyed my time and would recommend playing both of those games. Both have great things about them, and I have no reason to discredit either just because my preference was and is Gigantic. I purely want to show off the depths of their concepts and which one I believe has more to offer to its players, especially in terms of self-expression. Here's what an average game of Gigantic looks like. 2 teams consisting of 5 heroes compete to wound the opposing team's Guardian 3 times. In order to wound the enemy Guardian, your team must gain 100 power, at which point your Guardian will pin the opponents to the ground, giving you the opportunity for an attack. If your team outputs enough damage when the Guardian is pinned, that counts as a wound. Rinse and repeat. Since the game is a race for power, how do you go about collecting it? Power is rewarded via 2 methods, killing enemy heroes and summoning it from the land. Kills reward 10 power, while summoning rewards 20. Here's where the game plan of Gigantic becomes interesting. The game map is split up by these power summoning points. Both teams have an equal amount of friendly points on their side of the map, with a few contestable points in between. When a friendly summoning point begins gaining power, the opposing team's point will do the same. This ensures that both teams are provided an even amount of power, even if a team fight is not currently taking place. The contestable summoning points will gain power throughout the match as well, and it's up to your team to collect it before the enemy does. So far, these are already compelling objectives, but the creatures of Gigantic are what give the game mode its true identity. Players may call on creatures to guard friendly summoning points. These creatures will automatically summon power for your team when it's ready, while also defending the point from invaders. Creatures summon power much quicker than players, and each creature has an individual set of abilities, letting the player strategize where specific creatures should go. For example, the Cerberus will reveal enemy players on the map, the Bloomer will heal its allies when nearby, and the Cyclops will wall off corridors to keep the enemy team from invading a point. Additionally, if an enemy creature is killed, 10 power will be rewarded to your team, and if there is no creature on an enemy summoning point, you can steal the enemy team's power. There's even a creature, called an Obelisk, that can be placed on enemy summoning points, denying your opponents from collecting their power and using that power to attack them instead. Taking a quick break from creatures, let me explain what Focus is. Each hero in Gigantic is supplied with 4 standard abilities and 1 Focus ability. A Focus ability is essentially just an ultimate ability that charges up over time. Instead of leveling it like a traditional ultimate, you charge it up by participating in team fights, killing creatures, and wounding the enemy guardian. Focus can stack up to 3 times, giving focus abilities more damage or increasing their duration. For example, Uncle Sven's focus ability is an area of effect polymorph that lasts for 2 seconds. Each level of focus raises the duration of this polymorph by 2 more seconds, capping at a whopping 6 seconds for level 3. The other use for focus is upgrading baby creatures. Upgrading creatures increases their total health, ability strength, and gives additional effects to their existing abilities. In some cases, upgrading a creature will give them completely new abilities, offering a plethora of strategies for the team to consider. The final phase of a Gigantic match is the Clash. This occurs when both teams collectively reach 100 power 5 times. When the Clash begins, a new part of the map will open, moving creatures and guardians closer together and creating new environments and passageways for players to navigate. Clash has much higher stakes, as one decision could flip a lead in the other team's favor. Let's compare Gigantic's game mode to Overwatch's 3 standard game modes. Escort the Payload, Control the Point, and Deathmatch make up Overwatch's standard modes, with a 4th being a hybrid of Escort and Control. Escort the Payload consists of pushing a payload to the enemy's side of the map while teamfighting in between. The more players are near the payload, the faster it moves on its track. Control the Point has both teams competing to stay on a point long enough to win the round. Each time a team wins a round, the point is moved to a new section of the map. Same as Escort, the more players currently standing on the point, the faster it will be captured. And finally, Deathmatch is a free-for-all game mode where 8 players compete to see who can get 20 eliminations first. The issue with the comparison between Gigantic and Overwatch is that Gigantic isn't solely a hero shooter. It has the roots of a MOBA, making players juggle objectives and manage their resources. Overwatch's game modes are essentially 2 different ways to see who can teamfight the most efficiently, cutting out all the extra fluff in between. The approach that Overwatch takes is easily digestible and works very well, especially for casual audiences. The problem I have with Overwatch's approach is that it lacks self-expression. It is my belief that while Gigantic offered only 1 game mode, it did so with more interesting concepts than any of Overwatch's 3. At the same time, I do believe it was a major blow to Gigantic's lifespan, not providing a simple deathmatch for the casual experience. This would offer new players a chance to experiment with gameplay mechanics and heroes in a low-stakes environment. There was almost no way Motiga had the time or resources to do so, but it could have massively improved their player numbers and translated the game's concepts more efficiently. Not only are Overwatch's 2 main game modes similar in their objective, but there is nothing in between for the player to have control over. Overwatch has no itemization, skill upgrades, or movement mechanics. This leaves little room for players to express themselves, essentially creating one way to play each hero and fill each role. When we look back at Gigantic, there is still no itemization, but instead each hero has a skill tree that can be upgraded throughout the match. Hero abilities have 2 upgrade paths to choose from, with a second branch of choices to follow. For each ability, there are a total of 6 choices that the player can make, giving them full control on how they prefer to pilot their hero. Additionally, at level 5, heroes have access to their passive upgrade. This upgrade will give value to certain areas that the player may want to prioritize. Depending on how you want to build your hero, these upgrades can benefit that build greatly, especially during a clash. For example, Lord Gnosis is considered a bruiser-type hero in Gigantic, meaning he's a hybrid of a tank and a DPS hero. This hero's Bull Rush ability can be upgraded to either give him a temporary 400 health, or increase his basic attack damage by 15%. Gnosis can adapt to a tankier or higher damage role depending on what your team needs or how you prefer to play him. Every hero in Gigantic has a great deal of tweaks you can make to them, and the possibilities leave the player with many creative ways to express themselves. The final aspect that I believe sets Gigantic apart from Overwatch and Paladins is the stamina system, and the movement mechanics that come with it. I claim that Overwatch doesn't have any movement mechanics present in the game, but that's not entirely accurate. For the most part, Overwatch's movement mechanics boil down to hero strafing, and how effective your positioning is within a team fight. There are a few exceptions, however. Lucio's wall run, Wrecking Ball's grappling claw, and Doomfist's rocket punch are all excellent examples of movement abilities in Overwatch. These 3 heroes were hands down the most fun I had when playing Overwatch due to their creative approach to movement during combat. Besides a few more exceptions, this is the depth at which Overwatch's movement reaches. A handful of heroes in Gigantic's roster are also equipped with abilities that provide movement, but the key element is the universal stamina bar attached to every hero. Stamina allows heroes to sprint, jump, dodge, and jump attack. When out of combat, sprinting and jumping cost no stamina, but while in combat, they will cost varying amounts. Sprinting and jumping are self-explanatory, allowing you to maneuver quickly and jump around the game's vertical maps. Dodging allows the player to avoid damage by dodging side to side or backwards. You may also dodge in the air to cancel the momentum of jumps, essentially allowing the player to uncommit from a possible mistake at the cost of stamina. Jump attacks are exclusive to melee heroes and give them an advantage when chasing down enemies. If a jump attack is performed while an enemy hero is facing away from the player, a cripple will be applied, limiting their movement speed and the ability to jump. Throw all of these elements into a blender, and the stamina bar creates a wide variety of back and forth scenarios. Stamina is a finite resource that can make or break team fights, so the player must learn to manage this resource in order to be successful. The potential this mechanic provides is immense, and although Gigantic was played at a competitive level, I don't believe the mechanic's skill ceiling was reached. To summarize my thoughts, Gigantic offered an experience that I have not had since. From its lush visuals to its deeply complex mechanics, Gigantic held something special that I believe no multiplayer game has accomplished, and did so while remaining a free-to-play game. Motiga made many decisions that damaged their game's growth, but stood by those mistakes with the belief that they could always do better. Poor internal decisions tied with the barrage of obstacles out of their control resulted in a game destined to be snuffed out. Although it was shut down, Gigantic still remains many people's favorite multiplayer game, and I hope with this video I could showcase why that is. I for one still ponder what could have been, but I'm grateful for the few hundred hours I got to enjoy back then. Thank you to every Motigan for the endless work you put into this game. Regardless of its outcome, you should be deeply proud of what you created. Well, this was certainly an unexpected surprise. If you have not heard already, Gigantic has been announced to officially return to Steam on April 9th of 2024, and I could not be more excited. The game is said to launch with new characters, new maps, a new game mode, updated UI design, and it will be cross-play with PlayStation and Xbox. If you were a fan of Gigantic 5 years ago and you want the opportunity to play this game again, I implore you to please prepare for April 9th and buy this game when it releases. It will be $20 out the gate. Apparently there will be no microtransactions in the game. $20, in my opinion, for the content that you get is a steal, and they are saying that they will continuously update the game after it's released. If you've not played Gigantic, now is your chance. This will be an incredible time for old and new fans to come together again and play, in my opinion, one of the best multiplayer games of all time. So with that, friends, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, send it around to your friends, and I will see you on the airship.